Welcome to Talking Tours at Limelight Arts Travel. Today, my name is Mark Lalor. I'm the product manager here at one of the product managers here at Limelight Arts Travel, and it's been a great pleasure of mine to not only come up with the idea, but to put together this tour that we're running next January to Tunisia and Algeria. And a highlight of that has been getting to meet Dr. Helen Pope, who's going to run the tour with us. But before we get underway today, you'll see the slide we have here. We also have a welcome to country slide that I'm going to show, if I can find it. And I can't seem to get to that slide, folks, so I'm sorry about that. But just as you're probably aware, that we acknowledge the people of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands we sit today, and their elders, futures, present, and past. So with that in mind, I'd like to get underway and introduce you to Helen. Good afternoon, Helen.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Tell us where you're coming from today. Where are you?
Well, I'm in Rome, which is the city I've lived in for the last 45 years, I think, 45 years.
Wow.
Another beautiful spring day here in Rome.
Oh, that's great. Winter's well and truly upon us here in Sydney.
Yeah.
It's a bit windy today. We've had about 3 weeks of rain, and you may have heard about the flooding events.
No, we're enjoying spring weather, which is very unusual. It seemed for a while that spring disappeared, but it's just been beautiful, beautiful spring weather here in Rome.
Oh, well, that's fantastic news. I guess, talking about what we do and how we do it and the people who lead the tours for us, they're all very special people with their own sort of backgrounds and histories, and yours is fascinating. So could you give us a bit of a background or a history of yourself, of what you've done, what your life's been like, how you've ended up in being interested in places such as Tunisia and Algeria?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Now, I'm a Ballarat girl. I grew up in Ballarat, and I think my life changed when I was 11 years old and had my first Latin lesson at school in Ballarat. And with that Latin lesson, suddenly I was exposed to a very old world that was full of wonderful things, it seemed to me. I mean, 2,000 years ago, and there was great buildings and great sculptures and great art and great literature, and a language that seemed to me fascinating because it was different from English or from French or from something like that. And I just literally, from my first Latin lesson, I just became enamored, totally enamored of Rome. And it was then, when I was 11, that I decided I was going to study Latin, and that when I grew up, I was going to live in Rome, and that's what I've done. So I studied Latin at Monash University, and then I did my PhD in Latin also at Monash University, and then I had an Italian government scholarship, which brought me to Italy, and for the next 2 years after my doctorate, I went up and down Italy and Greece. I spent 6 months in Greece. I went up and down Italy and Greece looking at ancient sites, but of course, learning something about later cultures, which was just extraordinary. And when I went back to Australia after those 2 years, I was fortunate to get a job not in the classics department at Monash, but in the visual arts department at Monash University with Patrick McCackey. It was the very beginning of the visual arts department.
Oh, that's a name people will know.
Yes. Patrick, I think, was the youngest professor in Australia at that time. and the department was very new, and he decided to take a chance and employ me. And so I had 5 wonderful years teaching at Monash, teaching in the visual arts department, teaching classical art and architecture, but also some of the later art and architecture, especially Italian Renaissance and Baroque. And when that finished, in those days, there were non-renewable contracts for tutors. I thought I'd rather be back in Italy than in Melbourne without a job. So I came back to Italy, and I've been here ever since. But what happened when I was at teaching at Monash University, a friend of mine, Dr. Frank Sear, who was then professor of archaeology at the University of Adelaide, and whom I had met when I was living in Rome, and who had done his doctoral thesis on the Roman mosaics in Algeria and Tunisia, he decided he wanted to revisit them and take a small group. And I thought, wow, that sounds amazing to go to those places with somebody who knows them so well. So that was way back in 1978, my first visit to Tunisia and Algeria, specifically to look at the Roman sites and the Roman mosaics. And it was just a transformative experience, I'd have to say. We started with Algeria, which was such a different world. I mean, I had never been exposed to a non-European world, and it was so different in so many ways. The people, obviously they spoke a different language, they dressed differently, they had a different sense of things, of time, of other things, and it was just absolutely fascinating to me to be in a world that was so different. But then to see things that were familiar, going to the Roman sites and seeing things that I knew. So it was something about seeing familiar things like the Roman sites, which I knew very well, of course, from my travels in Italy and Greece, but in a very different context. And I think that was one of the things that fascinated me so much about being there. And it makes you think differently about those sites. If you see them in Italy, you see, there they are, but you see the Roman Forum, you see the temples, you see the baths, and you see in a completely different context, then you just think, you provoke to think different things about them. So I think that was the beginning of my fascination of that part of the world, and that never stopped. I mean, once I was exposed to Algeria and Tunisia on that trip, I just wanted to pursue those things. So as you know, I've traveled widely in the Middle East and looked at a lot of Roman ruins around the Middle East. So that's how it all began. It began with Frank Sear, who then he subsequently became professor at Melbourne, I think, and has written widely on Roman architecture.
Wow. And I mean, going back to the 70s, I mean, we're talking very different times. We're talking very different period of history and all the changes that have happened since then in the geopolitical world and the world we live in now. A young lady, a young girl, flitting off to far-flung places. What was it like at that time in the 70s for someone from Australia?
Well, particularly, I suppose, Algeria, there was really not much tourism at all in Algeria. We felt very foreign. They weren't used to foreigners being there. I mean, on the one hand, we had the sites to ourselves, which was absolutely wonderful. On the other hand, we did feel a little bit of antagonism, I think, then, which I have not felt subsequently. In Tunisia, going from Algeria to Tunisia was an interesting change, because then there was tourism in Tunisia, and it seemed far easier. But it's Algeria, I think, the two that stands out in my mind. I suppose because it was so different, and for that reason, just made me think so much more about all kinds of things. But yeah, it was a very different time. As you know, I've been back very recently to both countries, and yeah, they're both transformed, and I'm happy to talk about that either now or at some point during our talk today.
In a way that's a positive transformation? Is it just modernization? Is it Western
No,
influence?
it's a positive transformation, I think, for both places. I took two groups to Algeria last year, and and the people in Algeria were so welcoming. They were so friendly, so helpful. I mean, people would stop us in the street and just say, they spoke mostly in French, bonjour. They would ask if everything was all right. They were helpful. And I think the people I had in those groups I took then were amazed at how friendly and nice the Algerians were. They were all the time just so welcoming, and that was wonderful. And I think also they appreciated people coming to visit them. They felt they'd been isolated for a while, and they were quite grateful that people would come and were interested in them. So that is a very significant change. Tunisia, I was in recently, and of course they had a period where there weren't tourists after the revolution, and so they're very happy to have tourists back again. And I found again there in Tunisia just how friendly and welcoming the people were. I mean, and I think the other thing, because I live in a very tourist city, I mean, how
Mm.
genuine the people seemed in their welcoming of you. I mean, it didn't seem at all artificial. It just seemed they were genuinely happy to see you. They genuinely wanted to help you. And that was really lovely in both countries. That was really one of the loveliest things about the trips.
I think the cultures, well, Middle East in general, but the North African cultures we know little of, but knowing of the Berber people
Yeah.
and their famous hospitality, I think
Yes.
that probably comes
Yes.
through in these visits.
Right, and Arab hospitality is famous too. The Berbers and the Arabs both very, very famous for their hospitality, and we certainly experienced that.
I guess I want to talk more about that coming down the track, but I guess what fascinates me about you as well, Helen, is what interests you in terms of what I see when we've been talking, going through this process for the past few months, that in that time you've been to Yemen. You've had
Yeah.
virtually a month in Iran recently. I mean,
Yeah.
are you attracted to danger, or is it just a fascination with?
Well, do you know, I think when I first went back in the late 70s to Algeria and Tunisia, I was so in a sense shocked by what I saw, and I'd studied Greek and Roman history at university. It had been something I thought I knew very well. But what I realized was my own education had been completely Eurocentric,
Yes.
completely Eurocentric. And all of these amazing things outside the European world had been hidden in a way from me or just been denied. And I think just seeing the wonders that were there and the culture that was there, the ancient culture and the contemporary culture, I felt very cheated in a sense. I felt a lot of things had been hidden from me, which were extremely important. And I didn't want to be just Eurocentric. I wanted to discover the world outside that, which I didn't know. And so I think it's that took me to a lot of these places. I spent a sabbatical in Syria. I was very, very lucky to have a full year in Syria in 2006. Just a full year there, looking at Roman things and trying to understand something about the Roman Empire and the Roman sites and the influence in them back and forth between the two. It wasn't just Roman domination of the local people, but the local people and how they influenced Rome. And of course, the biggest influence to Rome came from the East. That had more influence
Yeah.
than anywhere else. And I just wanted to counteract that Eurocentric education I'd had, to go to places that I didn't know, but that were very, very important intellectually, culturally, historically, all of that. The Romans went to Yemen. They took an army
Mm.
and they marched to Yemen, Arabia Felix. I took a plane and went to Yemen. It was a lot easier. I think a lot of those guys died on the way back. But and in Sudan, I remember in Sudan going to the museum in Khartoum, and there was the bust of Augustus, and I thought, oh, what's he doing here? And you
he's
see those
he's
things
everywhere from
or
what I've been reading.
everywhere, and and then I went, Turkmenistan, which is one of, the really bad countries. I went to Turkmenistan a couple of years ago, and I went because of a passage in Plutarch's life of Crassus. I mean, it was the classics that took me there, because in the great battle of Carrhae, where Crassus was defeated by the Parthians, the Parthians, the barbarians. But what Plutarch says is that Crassus's head was brought to him. And what was he doing in his capital? His capital was probably Nisa, which is just outside Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan. And what was the Parthian king doing? He was watching Euripides play the Bacchae. And I thought, so much for the barbarians. This was just a wonderful image. So what I'm very grateful to the classical world for taking me to these places, because it's the classics that took me to Algeria and Tunisia in the first place. Perhaps they took me to Yemen, they took me certainly to Syria and a lot of the Middle East, they took me to Turkmenistan. They've taken me to places that I probably wouldn't have dreamed of without that sort of impetus that came from the classical world. And I'm just, the mobility of people in the Roman world always astonishes me. You go to these places and you see something Roman there, and you think, they didn't take a plane there, they marched there. It's quite astonishing.
I suppose then that brings us to the sort of questions of what on the tour, particularly the themes of the tour, and what you'd like to explore with everyone who comes along. Is it that?
Well, I was just going to say one thing about going to Iran. I think the first time I went to Iran, there's a wonderful rock carving, and it shows the Persian king on horseback, and his horse is treading on the Roman emperor. My goodness, I never had any idea about those things. Again, it was just a shock to see something like that. Anyway, that was just, seeing the Romans being crushed in Iran was amazing. The things I'd like to look at, obviously, are the whole process of empire. I mean, how did the Romans do this? How did they start it off? Was it a deliberate thing? And why, when you look at the Roman cities, they're sort of very Roman in a way. They put down Rome everywhere they went. Why did they need to have the forum, the capital, the baths, the markets, the everything like that? It's just Rome, 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 wherever you go in the Roman world. As I was interested in Syria, what the relationship was between the local people and the Romans who went there. I'd like to look at those things. Of course, now colonialism is a major topic, and places are decolonizing, museums and other places. So I think the whole aspect of colonization, whether by the Romans there or particularly in Algeria, the French colonization, how the French used Roman archaeology for their own imperialist aims. I mean, that's absolutely a fascinating topic, and there's a wonderful book that deals exclusively with that, and thinking about, obviously, in today's world. So I think the themes of empire, of colonialism, are very important. The interrelationship of the local people, which is harder to work out because we don't have sources from locals. But there are certain things that you can work out about that interaction, which is very significant. And the Romans kept it together for a long time. So I think I'm also very interested in the effects of tourism on places like this. Of course, in this trip, I think we have 10 UNESCO sites.
Yeah.
10 UNESCO sites.
Amazing.
There's also an influence of whether a site has UNESCO recognition or doesn't, in terms of how it's maintained or how it's neglected, and the competition for UNESCO sites. So I think it's very interesting to think about those sites, not just in terms of being Roman sites, but those sites through history up until now. So yeah, I'm interested in that as well, to talk about those things.
And even the histories going back pre-Roman, the sort of the civilizations that have come through from Neolithic right through, people will have heard of the Punic Wars, don't know about Carthage.
Yes.
About
Yeah, of course. The Berbers to the Punic,
Yeah.
to the Roman, to the Vandals, to the Byzantines, to the Arabs.
Everybody's been through there. It's
Yes.
just one of those amazing
Yeah.
places that seems so much history.
Yeah.
Mm,
Very
yeah.
rich all the way through, and something to learn every step of the way, I think.
So we put together this itinerary, begins in Tunis, and I think everybody's mind turns pretty much there into the main site, as you mentioned, UNESCO, and it's you've also touched on the fact of how well preserved things are, which they are, but I guess everybody knows Carthage, and that's probably one of the main reasons that people might come along, is a desire to see Carthage. Can you been there last week or the week before? Can you give us a bit of a background?
Like the Carthage is, I mean, it's a sort of paradox in a way, in that I think a lot of people don't realize that Carthage is embedded within the suburbs of Tunis, so you can't actually walk the whole site, and everywhere there are residential housing units, and so I think there are several metro stops in Carthage. So you look at one thing there, and you get in a car and drive through the suburb to the next thing. So there's that aspect. On the other hand, its history and its mythology are just so fascinating and so romantic too, I think, that it makes it very special. Yes, I was there last week. I'm absolutely knocked out by the main part of the site of Carthage is the Antonine Baths, and they're just enormous. They are so huge that you can't imagine what the whole city was like. If the baths were on that scale, what was the whole city like? And it must have been extra. Why did they build baths that are just so enormous? How did they feed the baths? And then you look at the water systems, and I've never seen anything in all of my Roman travels like the water systems there are in Carthage to feed the city. And of course, the city was enormously wealthy, both in Punic times and in Roman times. So there's huge wealth there that you see not just in the scale of the baths, but you also see in some of the luxury villas that one of them in particular has been restored, and you get a good sense of the luxurious lifestyle there. And the marbles, just amazing. A lot of those marbles finished up in Italy. They finished up in Pisa, in Venice, in Genova. The marbles must have been quite remarkable. And then you think, apart from the history of it and the destruction of Carthage, Carthago de Lendres, it must be destroyed, razed to the ground completely, and then settled first of all under Julius Caesar and then under Augustus for veterans and for urban poor, and then how it grew from that point on. But then the whole wonderful myth of the founder of Carthage. I mean, I don't know any other city that was founded in mythology by a woman, and the fact that Dido, the queen of Carthage, is given the role of the founder of the city, I think, is quite remarkable. A woman. Virgil says, "Dux femina facta." A woman is the person behind all of this. And then, of course, Virgil picks up the story. As far as we know, Virgil's the first one. The poet Virgil is the first one to put Dido and the Trojan hero Aeneas together and have this romantic affair in Carthage. There's nothing about that before Virgil, but that gives a certain romantic flavor to it. And when we're in Carthage, we would certainly read some of the great speeches from Dido and Aeneas there. I mean, it's just wonderful stuff. But I'm absolutely fascinated why they chose a woman to be their founder. It's remarkable. It's unique. And then you can see also from there, you can see the port, the ancient port of Carthage, which is circular and took 220 ships. I mean, that's a lot of ships, but it was the biggest commercial empire in the ancient world. I mean, it was huge.
So the location
it's a fascinating site. I mean, it's a difficult site because of the suburbs, but what you see is remarkable.
And that was the important part of the strategic importance of the portside location and
yes,
empire
of course, from early times, from the Punic times, from the times it was founded in probably in the 9th century BC, but a lot of these dates are still disputed by scholars, but probably in the 9th century BC with the Phoenician trading.
Was it seen as a prize for the Romans to take in the Punic situation and then razing it to the ground, take a established city and then destroy
I don't know that they saw it necessarily as a prize. I mean, the fact that they were ready to destroy the place completely, I mean, raze it to the ground and massacre most of the inhabitants is an indication that they weren't interested in it. There had been a plan beforehand to do something with it, which didn't come to fruition. Julius Caesar was the one who thought, well, I think it was more, yes, it's strategic, but after Julius Caesar's victory in North Africa in 46 BC, there were various places along the coast and inland set up by the Romans, and I think it became crucial for the Romans because of the grain, the wheat that came. I think that really basically fed the Roman population. That was crucial, but I haven't seen that Carthage itself was seen as a prize. But then the scale of it, it became so wealthy, and the scale is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, I think that's
Mind-blowing.
That's what will take people's breath away when they get to see it. You
Yeah.
mentioned marbles, and we do specifically at your request. We go to the quarries where they came from.
Oh yes. Oh, the quarries at Shem too, which are not very much on the tourist list. When I first went to them, I think we were the only people there, and they were absolutely remarkable because the marble that comes from Shem too in Tunisia is the pink yellow giallo antico. It's called pink and yellow. This great mountain of these glorious colors was absolutely stunning. And the Germans excavated there along with the Tunisians, and the Germans had set up then a small museum, which was very a didactic museum, showing how the marble was quarried, how it was transported, the life of the slaves who worked there. And that was a fascinating museum. Now they've built, I think, it may even be the second largest museum in Tunisia. Now they've built a super new museum, again, didactic, which shows all of that, the life of Shem too. And I think, when you look at the marbles, because they exported them all over the place, there are a lot of the marbles from Shem too in Rome. They're at Hadrian's Villa, they're in Augustus's Forum, they're all over the place. You just keep thinking, how did they get them here? And this is a museum that explains all that. And it's still remarkable. There were thousands of slaves, and what they have discovered is a sort of slave prison for them there, and the life must have been terrible. You could be condemned to work in the marble quarries, which was probably not a very nice thing to do. But the transportation, the working of the marble, all of those things are very clearly explained in the museum in Shem too, and I think it's a fascinating site. And I think on this program where we're looking at a lot of the Roman cities and seeing some marbles, it's a nice contrast to looking at a Roman city. Of course, there was a Roman city there. You have something on that scale, and you've got to have a Roman city nearby. But it gives a different perspective. It makes you think about different things there. So I think it's a lovely balance to looking at some of the towns themselves. I think it's a fabulous site. And I think the marbles were very much a symbol of the empire, and usually Julius Caesar controlled that quarry, and then Augustus after him, and then the emperors controlled the quarries throughout the empire, and they could say, bring in, the green from Turkey, or the giallo antico from Tunisia, or the white from Greece, or something like that. And And that putting them in buildings here was a demonstration of their power throughout the empire. I mean, they could just call on that and show it physically in Rome in the buildings, and everybody could see that they controlled those places. So the marbles are a fascinating part of Roman imperialism.
But they made grand statements in other ways as well, didn't they? So when we head out of Tunis to El Djem, we some a Roman theatre, but also what I've read as being the second largest Colosseum and important Colosseum and gladiatorial battleground place for entertainment for the Roman Empire and outside of Rome.
Yeah, well, of course, El Djem is another UNESCO site, and the amphitheater is, I think it's the third largest after the Colosseum in Rome and the one at Capua. I think it's the third. It's huge. I think it's 35 meters high. Well, the Colosseum in Rome is 40, perhaps 50. I mean, it's really very, very, very large. It's very dominating also because when you go down to El Djem, it's fairly flat. So you just see this great building rising out of the landscape. And it's pretty well preserved. It's the third amphitheater in El Djem. Tourists who go there don't know that there were two other amphitheaters there. They literally don't know that. They are completely neglected. There was one built in the 1st century, and then in the 2nd century, another amphitheater built on top of that. And then they decided it's not big enough. Doesn't accommodate our needs. So then they built this absolutely colossal one, and that says something about El Djem itself, doesn't it? That it's so big. Again, it's becomes a very wealthy town under the Romans. Had been Punic before, very wealthy, and you see that even now because I was there last week. As you go through to El Djem, there are olive trees, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of olive trees, and it was very fertile for olives in the Roman world. In fact, they exported olive oil to Rome from that area. So it was very wealthy. You build something that size, it's an indication of the wealth. But 3 amphitheaters. I mean,
it's incredible.
There's something very strange about that. But it's huge. It's impressive. It's built out of a local sandstone, so it's a kind of golden color, unlike what you get here in Rome. But it's again, and there are amphitheaters in so many of these places that the need to put down something like that when they're setting up Roman cities says something about the Roman population. Of course, some of the cities were for veterans; they were for soldiers who liked that kind of stuff. So it's huge.
Again, just so much history, and we sort of moving through the two countries, we come through all the different histories and the rise of Islam, and in Kairouan with the mosque that we go to see there, and just
another UNESCO site, Kairouan, of course, another UNESCO site there. I think what are there 6 UNESCO sites in the first 5 days or something like that. But Kairouan, yes, because that's interesting because the Romans did not build theirs. Kairouan is set up in the 7th century with the Arab conquest, and the great mosque there was probably first built at that time with the Arab conquest there, although it's later rebuilt in the, I think, 9th century. And the mosque is huge. It's very impressive. It's got recycled columns, hundreds of them, at least 500 recycled columns from Roman and Byzantine times. And then Kairouan became one of the most important cities in Islam. I mean, they claim after Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, they claim it's the 4th most important religious site.
And of course, complementing all these site visits, we're going to the museums associated with them as well, as you mentioned, be at the Bardo in Tunis, which is one of the most well-known museums, but also in Kairouan, there's the Islamic Arts and Crafts Museum, which, of course, well known as great artisans and craftspeople.
Yeah.
Anyone who's been
Yeah, and that museum at Rakada, it's the largest Islamic arts museum in Tunisia. I actually haven't seen it myself. I know one of the most important things in the museum is what they call, I think they call it the Blue Quran, which is a very ancient Quran, which is indigo blue, and all the letters are gold. Every single letter in the Quran is gold. So again, that gives us, something else, looking at the Roman cities and then looking at something like the Islamic Arts Museum there, which will be very different, obviously, from looking at the Bardo Museum, which is full of Roman mosaics. Most of the museums we'll see will be packed with Roman mosaics.
Yes, I guess I was just trying to point out the contrast between what we'll see with the Roman, the mosaics, of course, they're well renowned and fantastic, but the Arab arts are also
it'll be a nice balance as well as as something else to see, something that has a different kind of artistic stimulus. And of course the Medinas, I mean,
yes,
in cities, I was going to say the Medina in Tunis is another UNESCO site, and that's absolutely fantastic. The Medina in Kairouan, people may not know this if they're followers of Raiders of the Lost Ark. A lot of scenes were filmed in the Medina in Kairouan. So if they want to look at Raiders of the Lost Ark again, the scenes that are supposed to be shot in Cairo actually come from Kairouan, so they can get a sense of the Medina if they want to look at.
I didn't know that.
By now, something like 40 years old.
I think we talk about the scenes in Petra, but I haven't thought of that before.
Yeah.
I guess at this point, the itinerary says that we travelled to Hydra, but unfortunately we've had to make a few changes due to some warnings changed through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Travel site, and they put on a do not travel region with a certain period of the Algerian border and the other side of the Algerian border. So unfortunately, we're not able to go to Hydra at the moment unless that warning changes before. So just to let everyone listening know that we will rearrange the itinerary and resend it out, but we'll travel back to Tunis from where we'll fly to Algiers and then into Constantine. So we've crossed borders with not so much cross cultures, but a very different country, I'm sure, to Tunis, as you've mentioned, Algeria. And we start journeying through Algeria in what's known as the City of Bridges, Constantine.
Absolutely stunning city. I mean, Constantine, of course, is named after Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, although its history goes back, Neolithic times, but through as a famous Berber capital before the Romans stepped in. But it's such a dramatic city because of this great gorge that goes through the city, very, very, very deep. And then the bridges that connect the two sides now. So it's known as the City of Bridges. I think until fairly recently, one of the bridges was the highest bridge in the world. I don't think it is anymore, but you can walk across them. If you suffer from from fear of heights, then I don't recommend it. I mean, I remember the first time I walked across one of those bridges in the late 70s. I was terrified. I walked across them last year and found it quite exhilarating. And you look down into the gorge and you can see where there was a Roman bridge lower down, but the bridges are fantastic. I mean, they're very, very dramatic. The Great Gorge is very dramatic. And the city itself, although it doesn't have remains from the Roman times, is a very, very interesting city. And again, as a little bit of a balance, we'll visit the Palace of Ahmed Bey, which is a beautiful 19th century palace, wonderful tile work, beautiful gardens. And that's a lovely balance to the Roman things we'll be looking at. No, I think Constantine is really a very, very fascinating city.
And you wanted to talk briefly, I guess, about Titus as well, you mentioned to me.
Oh, Titus, I think is such a lovely city. It was a Berber city, a Berber village before it became Roman, and it was one of a series of satellite Roman towns around Constantine. And it's small. That's quite nice. It's built into the hillside, which created sort of engineering challenges for the Romans. So they've built a series of terraces. Some of the structures are built into the rock. There's a Mithraeum that's built into the rock. Some of the houses are built into the rock. It's small. It's very beautiful. The hills around it. The soil is absolutely red, absolutely red. And I think one of the most interesting things about Titus, it shows us something about mobility in the Roman world and mobility, and also how the local Berber population might rise to the top, because there's an inscription there to a man from Titus. He was the son of a Berber landowner. He became part of the Roman army. He was in Britain, he was in Germany, he was in Vienna, he was in Judea. Then he became governor of Lower Germany. He became governor of Britain, and he finished up as prefect of Rome. I mean, and this is a local Berber guy from this village outside of Constantine, and he had just traveled the world and finished up with a very high position in Rome itself. And I think that shows something quite remarkable about the way the Romans organized their empire. There's also there's a tombstone there that records the death of one of their local people at the age of 92. So
Wow.
walking up and down might have done him good. But, longevity, mobility, but that kind of mobility that a local boy can travel throughout the Roman Empire, can reach the position of governor in various parts, and then finish up in a high position in Rome is something quite remarkable. And the site is beautiful. The site is real. And again, we're looking at, I don't know, 10 Roman cities, but each one has a particular characteristic. Yeah, they've all got the Roman stuff. They've all got, there's the Forum, there's the Capitol, there's the temple to so-and-so, there are the baths, there's this, there's that. They've all got those things, but each one is different from every other one. And Titus is different in that it's small, in that it's in the hillside. The guide I had there last time, who's an archaeologist and writes on the archaeological sites of Algeria, he said he goes there to write. He just sits there looking out over this spectacular countryside and feels Titus, and that's where he goes to write. It's well, like all of the sites, it's very evocative.
Well, that's part of it. Some of these locations are spectacular, aren't they?
Yeah.
I
think they all are. When I took a group to Algeria last year, we started off in Algiers, and we went to Tipaza, was the first Roman site we went. And one of the people in the group said, "You've made a mistake here." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "You shouldn't have taken us to the best first." I said, "Wait till tomorrow," because every site really has something very special about it.
Well, we have saved that till last. Looking forward to that day and visiting Churchill as well, and sort of hopefully a lovely lunch overlooking the sea as one of our final days. But, is there anywhere else in Algeria that comes to mind that really?
Well, Timgad for me is very, very special. I think most people, Jamila is probably the most beautiful of all the sites in Algeria. Jamila is a word that means beautiful in Arabic, and it is very, very beautiful. It's hillsides, it's rolling hills, gorgeous site. But for me, Timgad is perhaps the most dramatic site. It's one of the sites that was built from scratch. It's not built on a previous Punic town or a Berber town or anything else. It's set up in 100 AD by the Emperor Trajan for for veterans, for military veterans. It's on a grid plan. The grid plan is absolutely visible there today. I mean, I think it's probably, yeah, it's another UNESCO site, of course, is the best Roman city to show that kind of plan. And then this arch just rises out, and the road is perfectly well preserved on one of the main roads, and you just look through, and there's the arch, so-called arch to Trajan, but probably not to him. And it's the drama of this site. I mean, for me, it's very, very special. You get a very strong sense of the Romans, I think, through this site. The museum is fantastic too, with wonderful mosaics there. But the drama of the grid plan of the arch rising up is unforgettable. I've never forgotten seeing that in 1978. And the other, well, Churchill is very special, not because of the Roman site, because there's not much left of that. A lot of that thanks to the French, but because this is again a very different site. Yes, it was a Punic site and it was a trading post, but what's remarkable about that site, which I find absolutely fascinating, is that it was given to Juba II by the Emperor Augustus to be his kingdom. Now, Juba II is the son, obviously, of Juba I, who was defeated by Julius Caesar. And when Julius Caesar defeated him in North Africa, Juba I committed suicide, but Julius Caesar took his young son to Rome. And so Juba II was brought up on the Palatine Hill. I mean, his whole world was Rome. That's what he knew. He's brought up in the imperial family. He's close to Augustus. He has the best education. In fact, he writes a lot in Greek, very erudite works. And then he is married off to Cleopatra Selene, who is the daughter of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. And she also is brought up on the Palatine Hill, because after Cleopatra is defeated, the twins were brought to Rome. Cleopatra Selene is brought up on the Palatine Hill. The kids sort of knew each other on the Palatine Hill, and their whole education has been in the Roman world. So when you go to Churchill, it's not that you see the city there, but when you go to the museum, which is small but exquisite, you see things that you see in Rome. I mean, the quality of the sculpture is remarkable. These are two highly educated people, both brought up in Rome, both with royal North African backgrounds, extremely cultured. So they're bringing to this city that they've been given by Augustus, they're giving it a remarkable character, I think, of being set up as an intellectual city by being, Cleopatra comes from Alexandria, which was the greatest intellectual center there. And so I think the sculptures there are remarkable, and they give a sense, yeah, this is a city set up by people who grew up in Rome, who knew Rome, and have decided to make this an outstanding center.
Wow. All these sites, two fairly large countries, a lot of traveling, a lot of road traveling. We've classified the tour as above moderate. And I have invited people to send in questions. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. And it has come up about what sort of physical requirements people might need for this tour, in terms of on the sites, on the grounds. There's a lot of long days.
I think the days are long, and there's a lot of driving between sites. Now, some people don't like a lot of driving. They don't want to be in a bus or a van all day long. I myself, I quite like going through the landscape and seeing it. I'd rather always go by land rather than fly. But there are long days in driving. In terms of the sites and physical ability, I think they're pretty easy. Actually,
Yeah.
I think most of them are pretty easy. Just looking through Carthage, yeah, it's flat. There's Djem is absolutely flat. Kairouan, there are a couple that are a bit more hilly. Duga is a bit more hilly. Jamila is a bit more hilly. I don't think they're strenuous sites. I think people would get tired from just being in traveling all day.
Mm.
But in the program, I see, you know, there are some days where there's quite a bit of rest time.
Mm. Yeah, I guess the sites are well preserved and they've been looked after
Well,
well
it's
in
very,
comparison to other
yeah,
places in
some
the
of
world.
them,
So
the sites are well preserved. Some of them are well preserved but neglected,
right.
particularly in Algeria, where they've been closed to tourism for a while, where they've thrown out the French and where they haven't had an interest in maintaining the sites. But the sites are well preserved, as I say, well preserved but neglected. Um, I don't, I can't think that they're physically demanding.
Yeah, okay, that's good. And I guess that always the eternal question is toilets.
Yeah. The toilets.
Yes, toilets near the sites. Well,
Yeah,
we will
there.
obviously arrange for adequate toilet stops on the way to and from. But if we're spending
Yeah,
half
I
the
think,
side, I think people's
yeah,
minds are rest if they know there's a bathroom.
we stopped several times at, you know, the places along the highway for toilet stops. At those toilet stops, there's always Western toilets and probably a couple of squat toilets as well. At a couple of the sites, there may be a toilet on site, but it may be a squat toilet and not a Western toilet.
But we'll have that organised day to day. We'll be talking. We have a national guide who'll be travelling with us, different one for
Yeah,
each country, and
yeah.
each day we'll be working that out with them as well as to where we can
Yeah,
stop.
I think mostly we stopped at highway stops.
Yes, yes, of course, and of course people can stretch their legs, have a bit of a break
Yeah.
there as well. And I
Hmm.
guess also time of year. It's January, February. We're travelling. Probably chosen because it's not the hottest season, June, July, August. But in general, temperatures
Well,
comfortable.
January is the coolest month of the year. Um, I mean, I think these days it's hard to predict what the weather will be like. I would have to say the first time I went with Frank Sear, we had snow in Constantine. It was pretty cold. It's yeah, it's the coolest time of year. I wouldn't say it'd be freezing cold, but it's cold. You'd need some warm clothes. And I think, I mean, in terms of that, one's just got to keep looking at the weather because the weather isn't what it used to be.
Of course. And well, for our clients, for all tours, we compiled an information booklet on the countries
Hmm.
considered and these types of questions going to those. And of course, anyone who has any further questions
Hmm.
can always ask the office via email or by calling up and speaking to the lovely Irene. And we can get
Hmm.
back to you if we don't know the answer, and can always
Hmm.
communicate with Helen from here as well to get her insights and knowledge on that as well.
Yeah.
But I think we're just about done, Helen. And
Well, I was just going to say the other thing is we had the sites to ourselves. I mean,
yeah,
and that was at a more high season time of year. I think one of the luxuries, you know, people had come from Rome to go there and just no queues, just being able to go into museums and look at things without people in front of you, walk around the site without be able to take your photographs without a million people in front of you. I mean, that was a luxury that everybody appreciated.
yeah, yeah. I think it's probably the best time of year to be going. We're not going for the beaches or the resorts or to go swimming in the Mediterranean, and we do try and do things around when things are less touristed, perhaps, and with the Europeans not really traveling at that time of year. It's a good time. Someone's just asked, am I coming along? And it turns out that if we have a decent amount of people sign up to the tour, then certainly I would be absolutely thrilled to be coming along, and I'm looking forward to it. And that is the plan at this point in time. So all things going well, I will be joining the tour to be with you and sort of see everything for myself, this fascinating place. There's been a question about visas, which we will answer upon receiving the bookings. There is a visa requirement for Algeria. It's a little bit complicated, so I won't go into details here. Tunisia doesn't require a visa. People are asking about food.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that you go to these countries for the, the culinary tour. I mean, it's not that. I mean, we ate well. They're both meat-eating countries, although I had vegetarians on the tour and they were fine. But there's a lot of meat. I mean, of course, couscous is one of the standard things in both countries, in Tunisia and Algeria. Of course, it's difficult to find a glass of wine. I mean, in both countries, alcohol is very difficult to find. So I think we had a glass of wine in Algiers, and you could get a glass of wine at some places in Tunis. But apart from that, it's it's water or fruit juice or something
Yeah,
something else. So yeah, eating couscous, tagines, grilled meat. We had some fantastic meals in Algeria with grilled meat. Wonderful.
and then obviously just taking the usual precautions in terms of health and hygiene. We're getting a few questions like that are things I think we can answer further down the track as we get closer when we send out the information booklets on the different countries. So if there wasn't anything specific further about what we're seeing or doing on the tour, then I'd better let you go and sign off for today. I want to thank you very, very much for joining us and giving us your insights, and you're clearly a passionate person about this area and this region, and it is.
Well, it has been a pleasure because I do, yeah, I love these places. I think they're amazing, and I think people are amazed by the sights, and they're amazed by how nice the people are in both countries, both in Algeria and Tunisia. Very, very
Wonderful
nice.
to get that sort of surprise if people are feeling hesitant or nervous or holding
Yeah.
back for those reasons. Of course, we're always on hand here in the office to answer any further questions, any concerns anyone may have. So I want to thank everyone who's joined us this afternoon as well. We have been recording this session, so if anyone would like to, we can send that out to you. I think that happens automatically. So if anyone would like to revisit anything that we've said or today, you can do that. That link can always be forwarded on to family and friends as well. But I'll leave it at that and say goodbye. And
Okay, goodbye to everybody. It was lovely to be with you.
all right. Thank you, Helen. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.